So there I was, sitting in this sterile white room that smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams, staring across a metal table at the most enthusiastic creature I'd ever had the misfortune to meet. 4 cameras pointed at my battle-scarred carapace like tiny judging eyes, and somewhere in the corner, a production assistant was probably calculating how much this interview would boost their quarterly ratings. Commander Vexthull, they called me. 300 cycles of military service across 17 different star systems, enough commendations to wallpaper a small moon, and a reputation that made enemy fleets reconsider their life choices. I'd seen plasma storms that could melt titanium, face-down hive minds that could process 1,000,000 thoughts per nanosecond, and survived the Great Nebula campaign, where we lost half our fleet to what turned out to be particularly aggressive space whales. But nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, had prepared me for humans. The kid across from me couldn't have been more than 50 cycles old, barely out of journalism academy by the look of his perfectly pressed uniform and that nauseating optimism that hadn't been beaten out of him by reality yet. Pip Quarrington, he'd introduced himself, from the Galactic News Network. His species had these ridiculous feather crests that changed color with emotion, and right now his were practically glowing rainbow with excitement. Commander Vexthull, he chirped, consulting his holographic notes like they contained the secrets of the universe. Thank you so much for agreeing to this interview. Our viewers are absolutely fascinated by your recent experiences with the human species. Recent experiences. That's what they were calling it now. Like I'd gone on some kind of cultural exchange program, instead of what was supposed to be a straightforward planetary conquest that turned into the most psychologically damaging 3 months of my entire military career. Let me get one thing straight, kid, I said, all 4 of my arms crossed in what I hoped was an appropriately intimidating gesture. I didn't agree to anything. My commanding officers strongly suggested I participate in this little media circus as part of my mandatory psychological evaluation. Apparently, requesting immediate transfer to the farthest corner of the galaxy after returning from Earth raised some red flags with the mental health department. His crest feathers shifted to a bright orange that I was pretty sure meant confusion mixed with excitement. Honestly, dealing with species whose emotions were broadcast like neon signs was exhausting. But surely you must have some fascinating stories to share about humanity's military capabilities. He pressed on, his voice carrying that particular brand of journalistic persistence that made me want to throw something heavy at his head. After all, you were part of the first major offensive against their homeworld. Our intelligence reports suggested it should have been a relatively straightforward operation. Straightforward, right. That's exactly what Command had told us too. Simple reconnaissance in force, they said. Standard intimidation protocols, they said. The humans were barely past their atomic age, they said. What could possibly go wrong? I should have known we were doomed the moment our cultural attaché tried to pronounce Earth and it came out sounding like a digestive problem. Fine, I said, settling back in my chair with the resigned air of someone about to relive their worst nightmare for public consumption. You want to know about human warfare, you want to understand what makes them so terrifying that 3/4 of my assault fleet requested immediate psychiatric leave after our encounter. Pip leaned forward eagerly, his recording devices practically humming with anticipation. Then buckle up, Featherhead, because I'm about to tell you exactly why humans are the most dangerous species in the known galaxy, and it has absolutely nothing to do with their weapons. The Terran Offensive, as it came to be known in our military archives, was supposed to be a textbook operation. And I do mean textbook, because some bureaucrat back at Command actually wrote it up as case study number 4 in the manual for subjugating primitive civilizations. They probably figured it would be a nice clean example for the Academy cadets to study between their advanced plasma dynamics courses and their seminars on proper surrender acceptance protocols. We had done our homework, or so we thought. Humans were a Class 7 civilization, barely capable of interplanetary travel, still using chemical propulsion systems that our engineers found adorable in their inefficiency. Their military technology was laughably primitive by our standards. Chemical explosives, kinetic projectiles, and a few crude nuclear devices that could maybe scratch the paint on our smallest scout ships. The plan was elegant in its simplicity: jump into their solar system with a full battle group, demonstrate our overwhelming technological superiority, deliver the standard ultimatum for unconditional surrender, and then spend a pleasant few weeks setting up the administrative infrastructure for their new colonial government. Standard operating procedure. We had done this dance with 47 different species, and it always ended the same way. So there we were, 300 ships strong, hanging in space just outside their moon's orbit like the galaxy's most expensive threat display. Our dreadnought Inevitable Conquest was broadcasting the surrender ultimatum in every language their primitive communication networks could handle. The translation algorithms had worked overtime to make sure our message was crystal clear: surrender now, or face the consequences of defying the might of the Zentaurian Empire. And then we waited for the usual response. Panicked government officials, emergency sessions of their ruling councils, maybe a few token displays of defiance from their military before the inevitable acceptance of their new reality. It was almost boring how predictable it always was. What we got instead was a video message from someone calling himself Captain Jake Rodriguez, apparently speaking on behalf of something called the United Earth Defense Force. He was sitting in what looked like a military command center, wearing a uniform that seemed to be held together with equal parts fabric and caffeine stains. Behind him, other humans were wandering around doing what appeared to be absolutely nothing productive. "Hey there, alien dudes," he began. And I swear on my ancestors' graves that those were his actual opening words to a hostile invasion force. "Got your message loud and clear. Really appreciate the whole dramatic entrance thing. Very professional. Quick question though, do you guys accept Venmo? Because our current military budget is tied up in a appropriations committee, and Karen from accounting says we can't authorize any surrender payments until fiscal year 2157. I remember staring at the communication screen, all four of my eyes blinking in sequence, trying to process what I had just heard. Around me, the bridge crew was exchanging glances that clearly said they were wondering if the translation software had malfunctioned. Also, Captain Rodriguez continued, apparently not finished with whatever cosmic joke he thought he was telling. "We're gonna need you to fill out some environmental impact paperwork before we can proceed with any major military operations. I know it's a hassle, but Earth is actually a protected biosphere now, and we have to maintain our green certification. I can email you the forms if you want. Fair warning though, they're mostly in PDF format." That's when it started to dawn on me that we might not be dealing with a typical primitive civilization. "Oh, and one more thing," the human said, reaching for something off screen. "My buddy Tony makes the best pizza in the sector, and he's wondering if you guys eat cheese. He's got this new pepperoni recipe that's supposed to be out of this world, pun intended. We were thinking maybe we could work out some kind of cultural exchange program. You know, learn about each other's societies before we get into all the conquering business." He held up what appeared to be a flat circular food item covered in melted dairy products and processed meat. Several humans in the background gave enthusiastic thumbs-up gestures. I turned to my communications officer, a competent young Zentaurian named Klix, who had graduated top of his class from the Imperial War College. "Are they?" I asked slowly. "Are they trying to bribe us with food?" Klix checked his instruments twice before answering. "Sir, I believe they are attempting to establish peaceful diplomatic relations through the exchange of consumable goods and administrative paperwork. They want us to fill out forms and eat pizza. That appears to be the core of their counter-proposal." "Yes, sir." I looked back at the screen, where Captain Rodriguez was still talking, now apparently giving a detailed explanation of the difference between thin crust and deep dish pizza styles. In the background, someone was holding up a sign that read, "Welcome to Earth, please drive carefully." That should have been my first clue that we were in for something completely outside the normal parameters of galactic warfare. Now you have to understand, we Zentaurians are a logical species. We've built an empire spanning 3 spiral arms of the galaxy through superior organization, advanced technology, and methodical application of overwhelming force. When faced with an unexpected situation, we adapt our strategies accordingly. We're professionals. So when the humans responded to our invasion with bureaucratic procedures and food service offers, we did what any reasonable military force would do. We escalated. Bigger guns, more intimidating demonstrations of our technological superiority, the full Imperial protocol for dealing with uncooperative primitives. That's when they introduced us to Margaret Paperworth. I still wake up in cold sweats thinking about that woman. She appeared on our communication screens exactly 47 minutes after we had vaporized one of their smaller moons, as a demonstration of our seriousness. Not their moon, mind you, just a lifeless rock they used for some kind of scientific research. We thought it would send a clear message about what happened to civilizations that didn't take the Zentaurian Empire seriously. Margaret Paperworth was approximately 60 Earth years old, wore clothing that seemed designed by someone who had only heard clothing described second-hand, and had the most terrifying expression I have ever seen on any sentient being's face. It was the look of someone who had spent decades dealing with incompetent middle management, and had finally reached the point where she was personally offended by inefficiency. "Excuse me," she said, and somehow managed to make those 2 words sound like a death threat. "I'm Margaret Paperworth, from the Department of Interplanetary Affairs Environmental Impact Division. I've been reviewing your recent activities in our solar system, and I'm afraid you're in violation of several dozen local ordinances." Behind her, I could see walls covered in filing cabinets that seemed to stretch up beyond the camera's view. The woman was sitting behind a desk that appeared to be made entirely of stacked paperwork. "Ma'am," I said, trying to maintain some semblance of military dignity, "we are the advance fleet of the Zentorian Empire. We don't recognize your local ordinances." "Oh, that's quite all right," she replied, with a smile that would have made a black hole nervous. "Ignorance of the law is not considered a valid defense. Now, regarding the destruction of Research Station Luna 7, that's going to require Environmental Impact Assessment Form 4471B, along with supporting documentation, proving that your weapons testing was conducted in accordance with our Clean Space Act of 2151. I looked at Clicks. Clicks looked at me. Neither of us had any idea what was happening. Furthermore, Margaret continued, pulling out what appeared to be a folder thick enough to stop small arms fire. Any military operations conducted within Earth's solar system require permits from at least 6 different departments. I have the applications right here, if you'd like to get started. Fair warning though, the average processing time is 18 to 24 months, assuming all your paperwork is filled out correctly the first time. We're not filling out paperwork to invade you, I said, my voice climbing to what I later realized was a distinctly unprofessional octave. Well then, I'm afraid you'll need to cease all military operations immediately, and file a request for exemption form 7823C. That's only a 6-month review process, but you'll need to provide proof of financial hardship, and a written statement explaining why normal permit procedures would constitute an undue burden on your organization. Somewhere in the background, I could hear Captain Rodriguez's voice calling out, "Hey Maggie, ask them if they want to set up a payment plan. I think our credit union offers military discounts." "That's an excellent point, Jake," Margaret replied, without taking her eyes off the camera. "Commander Vextol, would you prefer to handle the permit fees as a lump sum, or would monthly installments work better for your budget? At this point, I want you to imagine what it's like to be a decorated military commander, veteran of dozens of successful campaigns, sitting in the command chair of a dreadnought-class warship, capable of glassing entire continents, while a middle-aged human bureaucrat treats your invasion fleet like a contractor who showed up to install kitchen cabinets without the proper permits. "We have weapons that can destroy your entire planet," I said, the words coming out more like a whine than the intimidating threat I intended. "Oh my," Margaret said, flipping through her folder with practiced efficiency. "Planetary destruction would definitely require a Class 9 environmental impact assessment. Those take a minimum of 3 years to process, and that's assuming you can provide proof of insurance coverage for any potential damage to neighboring star systems." "What neighboring star systems? The nearest inhabited system is 12 light-years away." "Well, you never know where debris might end up. Space is very three-dimensional, after all." Now, about that insurance coverage, that was the moment when I realized we weren't just fighting humans. We were fighting the weaponized manifestation of every bureaucratic nightmare that had ever existed, refined through centuries of democratic government, and powered by the kind of administrative passive aggression that could make stars go supernova just to escape the paperwork. Pip was staring at me with those color-changing feather crests, now showing what I was pretty sure was a mixture of horror and fascination. "So what did you do?" he asked. "What could we do?" I replied. "We started filling out the forms. You have to understand. At this point we were still operating under the assumption that this was some kind of delaying tactic. Primitive species often tried to buy time while they frantically developed new weapons, or called for help from neighboring civilizations. We figured we'd humor them for a few days, complete their ridiculous paperwork, and then proceed with the conquest once they realized their bureaucratic stalling wasn't going to save them. That was before we discovered that humans had somehow managed to turn procrastination into an art form. The first sign that something was seriously wrong came during what should have been a routine reconnaissance mission. I had sent a squad of our elite shock troopers to gather intelligence on human military installations. These were veteran soldiers, each with over a century of combat experience, equipped with personal shields that could deflect anything short of a direct plasma cannon hit. They came back 3 hours later, completely unharmed, but somehow looking like they'd been through a psychological meat grinder. "Sir," reported squad leader Threx, a decorated veteran who had personally led the assault on the crystalline fortresses of Vega Prime, "we have successfully infiltrated the human military base, designated as Fort Carson." "Excellent. What did you learn about their defensive capabilities?" Threx's 3 eyes blinked in what I was beginning to recognize as the universal expression of someone trying to process an incomprehensible experience. Well, sir, they don't appear to have any. Come again? The humans allowed us to walk directly into their base, sir. No resistance whatsoever. In fact, they seemed quite pleased to see us. Obviously a trap. What happened next? Captain Rodriguez gave us a tour, sir. I stared at him. A tour? Yes, sir. He showed us their cafeteria, their recreational facilities, and something called a gift shop. Then he asked if we wanted to participate in their afternoon team-building exercise. Which was, laser tag, sir. I'm sorry, I thought you said laser tag. I did, sir. It's apparently a recreational activity where they run around shooting each other with harmless light beams while hiding behind inflatable barriers. The human soldiers treated it like actual combat training. At this point, I was beginning to suspect that either my translation software was malfunctioning, or I was having some kind of stress-induced hallucination. And what did you do? We participated, sir. It seemed rude not to. Private Zek won the tournament. That's when Captain Rodriguez decided to escalate his psychological warfare campaign. The next morning, we woke up to discover that every single one of our weapons had been replaced with something the humans called confetti cannons. Not disabled, not destroyed, but methodically unscrewed, emptied of their plasma charges, and refilled with small pieces of colorful paper. Our entire invasion fleet had been turned into the universe's most expensive party supply. How is this possible? I demanded of my security chief, a competent officer named Grax, who had been personally responsible for the fortress defenses on 17 different worlds. Unknown, sir. Our perimeter sensors show no signs of intrusion. The modifications appear to have been made by someone with intimate knowledge of Zentarian weapons technology. That's impossible. Our weapons systems are classified at the highest levels. Yes, sir. However, I did find this attached to your personal sidearm. He handed me a small note, written in what appeared to be crayon. It read, "Thanks for playing along with the laser tag yesterday. Hope you like the upgrade. Your new BFF, Captain Jake. P.S. The confetti is biodegradable." But the confetti cannons were just the beginning. Over the next week, the humans systematically replaced every piece of military equipment on our ships with increasingly ridiculous alternatives. Our tactical displays were replaced with children's coloring books. Our communication arrays were rewired to only play what they called elevator music. Our food synthesizers were reprogrammed to produce nothing but something called marshmallow peeps in various fluorescent colors. And through it all, Captain Rodriguez maintained constant communication with us, treating the entire situation like some kind of elaborate summer camp activity. He organized scavenger hunts throughout our ship, set up movie nights featuring what he called classic Earth cinema, and somehow convinced half my crew to participate in something called a talent show. "Sir," reported my tactical officer, during what was supposed to be a serious strategy meeting, "the humans have invited us to participate in their Friday night karaoke competition." "Absolutely not. They've already signed you up to sing something called My Way by Frank Sinatra. I don't even know what those words mean." "Neither do I, sir. But apparently it's considered a classic." That's when I realized the horrible truth. The humans weren't just defeating us through bureaucracy and administrative incompetence, they were doing something far more insidious. They were making us like them. Every interaction with these creatures left us more confused, more off balance, and somehow more invested in their ridiculous activities. They were turning warfare into a social event, and we were losing because we kept trying to be polite guests at our own invasion. "Commander," Pip interrupted, his feather crests now a deep purple that I was pretty sure indicated existential dread. "Are you telling me that humanity defeated your invasion fleet through the power of friendship and team-building exercises?" "Kid," I said, all 4 of my arms spread wide in a gesture of complete bewilderment, "I wish it were that simple." Because what came next made the confetti cannons look like a legitimate military strategy. The final phase of humanity's psychological warfare campaign began on a Tuesday. I remember this specifically because the humans had somehow convinced our entire crew to adopt their 7-day weekly calendar system, complete with something they called Casual Fridays, where military uniforms were apparently optional. It started when we received what appeared to be an official diplomatic communication from something called the Galactic Intervention Council. The message was professionally formatted, bore official-looking seals from dozens of different species, and was signed by representatives from civilizations we had never even heard of. "Commander Vexthull," the message began, "we are writing to express our concern about your recent aggressive behavior patterns in the Sol system. After careful consideration and consultation with our certified conflict resolution specialists, we have determined that immediate intervention is necessary for the well-being of all parties involved. I read the message 3 times before the full horror of what was happening began to sink in. Clicks. I called to my communications officer. Please tell me this is some kind of elaborate joke. I'm afraid not, sir. I've verified the authentication codes. This appears to be a legitimate diplomatic document from a coalition of 47 different civilizations. 47 civilizations that we've never had any contact with are concerned about our behavior. It gets worse, sir. They've scheduled what they call a galaxy-wide interventions for this Friday at 1400 hours, Earth Standard Time. The intervention, when it actually happened, was unlike anything in my 3 centuries of military experience. We found ourselves sitting in a large circle on what appeared to be folding chairs that had been set up in our own cargo bay. Representatives from dozens of different species had somehow materialized on our ship, each carrying what looked like prepared statements and boxes of tissues. Leading the session was a human woman who introduced herself as Dr. Harmony Blissfield, apparently a specialist in something called interspecies conflict resolution. She had the kind of aggressively cheerful demeanor that made you want to check if your weapons were still functioning properly, just in case. Now Vexed Hull, she said, consulting a clipboard that seemed to contain notes about my entire military career. We're all here because we care about you and we're worried about your recent choices. Would you like to start by telling us how you're feeling right now? I'm feeling like I'm in command of an invasion fleet that's been turned into some kind of cosmic therapy session, I replied, trying to maintain what little dignity I had left. That's a very valid feeling. Dr. Blissfield nodded sympathetically. And how do you think your aggressive behavior is affecting the people around you? Before I could answer, a representative from the Arcturian Trade Federation stood up. I had never seen an Arcturian before, but they looked like a cross between a jellyfish and a filing cabinet, and they were apparently very emotional. Vexed Hull, the Arcturian said, their translation device giving their words a distinctly weepy tone. When we heard about what you were doing to the humans, it reminded us of our own struggles with anger management. We've been there, buddy. We know what it's like to want to conquer entire civilizations when you're feeling overwhelmed. I'm not overwhelmed, I protested. I'm following standard Imperial protocol for territorial expansion. Denial is often the first stage of recovery, Dr. Blissfield noted, making what appeared to be clinical observations on her clipboard. Now, I'd like everyone to go around the circle and share one thing they appreciate about Vexed Hull as a person, not as a military commander. What followed was 45 minutes of the most surreal experience of my life. Representatives from civilizations I had never heard of stood up one by one to share positive observations about my character, my leadership potential, and my journey toward emotional growth. A crystal-based life form from the vegan system complemented my commitment to personal excellence. A hive mind, from somewhere near the galactic core, praised my willingness to explore new experiences. By the time they were finished, I was beginning to question not just my military objectives, but my entire understanding of how the universe was supposed to work. Now Dr. Blissfield said, we'd like to offer you some alternatives to invasion as a way of working through your feelings. Vexed Hull, have you ever considered pottery? Pottery. It's very therapeutic. We've set up a kiln in your rec room. That's when Captain Rodriguez appeared with what looked like a small mountain of clay and an expression of genuine enthusiasm that was somehow more terrifying than any weapon I had ever faced. Don't worry, Commander, he said, patting me on what I suddenly realized was my shoulder in a gesture of friendly support. I've been taking classes. I'll teach you how to make a nice vase. Very relaxing. The intervention concluded with everyone holding hands, or tentacles, or whatever appendages they happened to possess, while Dr. Blissfield led us in something called a group affirmation exercise. I found myself standing in a circle with representatives from nearly 50 different civilizations, reciting phrases about choosing peace over conflict and embracing our shared galactic community. The final straw came the next morning, when I discovered that the humans had somehow convinced my entire crew to participate in what they called a bake sale to raise funds for interspecies friendship initiatives. My elite shock troopers were selling cookies shaped like little spaceships. My weapons specialists were manning a booth that offered something called alien smoothies and flavors named after different star systems. And in the center of it all was a banner that read, "Welcome to the first annual Sol System Peace Festival," apparently signed by every member of my crew. Sir, reported Grax, approaching me with what appeared to be a plate of baked goods, the humans have asked if we'd like to make this an annual event. That's when I officially requested immediate evacuation back to Zentorian space. But Sir, Grax continued, they've also invited us to stay for their closing ceremony. Apparently there's going to be fireworks and something called a group hug. I looked around at my crew, all of whom were wearing matching t-shirts that said Invasion Fleet 2157, we came, we saw. We made friends, and realized that somewhere along the way, we had stopped being a military force and started being participants in the most elaborate cultural exchange program in galactic history. Pack everything, I told Grax. We're leaving, now. Should I tell the humans goodbye? I thought about that for a moment. After everything we had been through, after all the paperwork and confetti cannons and intervention sessions, it somehow seemed rude to just leave without saying anything. Fine, I said. But make it quick. 3 hours later, we were still saying goodbye. The humans had organized a farewell party complete with speeches, a slideshow of favorite invasion memories, and personalized gift bags for every member of my crew. Captain Rodriguez presented me with a framed photo of all of us at the talent show, where I had apparently won 3rd place for my rendition of Space Oddity. By the time we finally left Earth's solar system, my crew was already planning return visits. Half of them had exchanged contact information with their new human friends. My communications officer had somehow been enrolled in an online pottery class, and somewhere in the back of my mind, I was already wondering if they'd really meant it about making the Peace Festival an annual event. Now you might think that's where the story ends. Defeated alien commander limps home with his tail between his legs, files a report about humanity's unconventional tactics, and spends the rest of his career trying to forget about the time he got emotionally compromised by a species that weaponized friendship. Classic military embarrassment, case closed, everyone moves on with their lives. But here's the thing about humans, that I didn't understand until much later. They don't just defeat you and call it a day, they follow up. 6 months after our return to Zentarian space, we started receiving what Captain Rodriguez called care packages. Boxes full of Earth snacks, handwritten letters from the humans we had met, and updates on how the Peace Festival had evolved in our absence. Apparently they had named one of the cookie booths after my tactical officer, and Dr. Blissfield had started offering workshops on converting military aggression into creative expression. My crew was thrilled. They had started what they called a correspondence club, and were actively planning vacation time to attend the next year's festival. Half of them had learned to bake human recipes using our food synthesizers. The other half had taken up what they called scrapbooking to preserve their memories of the invasion. Meanwhile, I was trying to file official reports that made any kind of sense to command. How do you explain to your superior officers that your invasion fleet was defeated by administrative procedures and group therapy? How do you document the tactical significance of confetti cannons and karaoke competitions? The answer, as it turned out, was that you don't. Because 3 weeks after I submitted my preliminary report, I received a personal communication from Fleet Admiral Zorthak himself, the highest-ranking military officer in the Zentarian Empire. Commander Vextil, the message began, your report on the Terran contact has been classified at the highest levels of Imperial security. Furthermore, you are hereby reassigned to the newly created Department of Human Relations, effective immediately. Congratulations on your promotion to Director of Interspecies Cultural Exchange. I read the message 17 times before the implications sank in. They weren't court-martialing me for failing to conquer Earth. They were promoting me and creating an entire government department based on what had happened. Sir. Clix had said when I showed him the orders, I think they want us to do it again. Do what again? Get defeated by humans. Oh. But like officially this time, he was more right than I wanted to admit. Over the next few months, I found myself in charge of what was apparently the galaxy's first official program for learning human-style conflict resolution techniques. We weren't just studying their methods, we were implementing them across the entire empire. Border disputes that had been ongoing for centuries were suddenly being resolved through what humans called mediation sessions. Trade negotiations that had previously required military escorts were being conducted at what humans had taught us to call friendship dinners. Our entire diplomatic corps was being retrained in something called active listening skills, and it was working. Somehow, impossibly, ridiculously, it was working. The Crystalline Collective, our oldest and most stubborn enemies, agreed to a peace treaty after we invited them to participate in a cultural exchange program modeled after the Sol System Peace Festival. The Hive Queens of Andromeda, who had been raiding our shipping lanes for decades, became our trading partners after we introduced them to something humans called cooperative problem solving. 6 months later, I found myself standing in the same sterile interview room where this whole conversation started, but this time I was on the other side of the table. A parade of military officers from across the galaxy were coming to learn what we had started calling the human method. But Commander, said a young Rigelian captain, who was taking notes with the kind of desperate intensity I recognized from my own early days in this program, surely there must be some conventional military application to their techniques. Kid, I told him, that's exactly the wrong question. The human method isn't about military applications, it's about realizing that maybe, just maybe, there are better ways to solve problems than pointing bigger guns at them. But what about tactical superiority, force projection, strategic dominance? You want to know about strategic dominance? I asked him. 3 years ago, humans were a Class 7 civilization that barely qualified for first contact protocols. Now they're the unofficial mediators for half the conflicts in this galaxy. They've got trade agreements with civilizations that didn't even know they existed. Their pizza recipes are being served in restaurants on 47 different worlds. I paused to let that sink in. They didn't conquer the galaxy, kid. They made the galaxy want to be friends with them. And somehow, that turned out to be way more effective than anything we ever accomplished with our fleets. Now sitting across from Pip with his color-changing feathers and his recording devices, I could see the same mixture of horror and fascination that I had felt during those first confusing days in Earth's solar system. So what you're telling me, Pip said slowly, is that humanity has become the galaxy's dominant power through aggressive niceness. That's part of it, I replied. But here's the really terrifying part, the thing that keeps me awake at night. I don't think it was accidental. Pip's feathers shifted to what I was pretty sure was a color that meant please explain before I have an existential crisis. Think about it, I continued. Every single thing they did, from Margaret Paperworth's environmental impact assessments to Captain Rodriguez's karaoke competitions, was perfectly calculated to throw us off balance. They knew exactly what they were doing. They studied us, figured out our weaknesses, and exploited them with surgical precision. But the weakness they exploited was our complete inability to handle kindness. I finished for him. They realized that our entire military doctrine was based on the assumption that everyone would respond to us the way we respond to threats, with fear, anger, and escalating violence. We had no protocols for dealing with a species that responded to invasion with friendship and therapy sessions. I leaned back in my chair, all 4 arms crossed, and looked directly into his recording devices. You want to know the most chilling part of this whole experience? 3 months after we left Earth, Captain Rodriguez sent me a personal message. Just a quick note to see how I was adjusting to my new job and to let me know that if I ever wanted to talk about anything, he was always available. That seems nice, Pip said, though his feathers were now cycling through colors I couldn't identify. The message was sent from a ship in the Vega system, I said. Apparently he had been promoted to head of something called the Human Diplomatic Corps, and they had decided to start making friendly contact with civilizations throughout the galaxy. Proactively. They're not waiting for other species to find them anymore, kid. They're going out there and making friends whether the galaxy wants them to or not. And based on the reports I've been getting, their success rate is 100%. I stood up from my chair and walked over to the small window that looked out over the sprawling complex that had become the Department of Human Relations. Ships from dozens of different civilizations were coming and going, their crews attending workshops on conflict resolution, cultural sensitivity training, and something Dr. Blissfield had developed called empathy in the workplace. The humans didn't just defeat us, I said, watching a group of Arcturian diplomats practice what appeared to be group hugs with a team of former Zentarian shock troopers. They fundamentally changed what victory means, and the scariest part is I think they're right. Pip had stopped taking notes, his feathers had settled into a solid silver color that I was pretty sure meant existential acceptance of a new reality. So what happens now? He asked. Now, I turned back to face him with something that might have been a smile if Zentarians were capable of smiling. Now we all learn to be better neighbors, whether we want to or not. And if someone refuses, kid, I said, gathering up my files and preparing to leave, have you ever tried to stay angry at someone who genuinely wants to be your friend? Someone who remembers your birthday, asks about your family, and brings you cookies when you're having a bad day? No. Trust me, I said, walking toward the door, it's impossible. And that's why humans are the most terrifying species in the galaxy. They've weaponized hope. As I left the interview room, I could hear Pip talking to his recording equipment, probably trying to figure out how to explain to his viewers that the universe had fundamentally changed while they weren't paying attention. I almost felt sorry for him. After all, I remembered what it was like to think that military might was the ultimate form of power. It seemed so simple back then, when the galaxy made sense and problems could be solved by pointing bigger guns at them. Now I had a dinner meeting with a delegation from the Spiral Arm Trade Federation, followed by a group meditation session with some former pirates who were transitioning into what humans called community outreach coordinators. And you know what the really crazy part was? I was actually looking forward to it. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I made a note to send Captain Rodriguez a message thanking him for the birthday card he had sent last month. It had been a thoughtful gesture, and it seemed rude not to acknowledge it. After all, we were friends now, whether I had planned on it or not.